tanked, with the euro struggling to recover on Friday as the European Central Bank's decision to slash its growth and inflation forecast then added to increasing pessimism about the global outlook. Now, the announcement and an extension of stimulus is the latest warning of a lean road ahead for China after it unveiled a target for growth that would be its slowest in 3 decades, and as the US Federal Reserve indicated that it will hold off on any fresh rate hikes this year. Now, the Nikkei lost precisely 2% to close the day at 21,025 points. The Hang Seng out in Hong Kong was down 1.8%, closing trading at 28,275, while the Shanghai Composite was the steepest faller. That drowned out 4.4%, 2,969 points. Over to the United States now, where Wall Street's main indices fell for what was a 4th consecutive session on Thursday. This comes after Europe's central bank said it would defer interest rate hikes and offered banks a new round of cheap loans, raising fresh concerns about global economic growth and, of course, emerging markets taking a bite of the dust as well. The Dow Jones Industrial was over 0.75% lower at 25,471. The S&P 500 also managing to move down by a similar mark, closing out the day at 2,748. The Nasdaq Composite giving up 1.1%, ending at 7,421 points. Around 0.25% lost thus far on the JSE All Share. When one takes a look at how that market is performing, it is negative across the board, really. When you take a look at how things have fared, there are major companies as well on the mend, if you want to call it that, with around half of the value of Aspen being lost as well today after a poor set of earnings. We'll unpack all of that and unpack exactly how things are fared in the global markets. But for now, let's get into those numbers and we'll get into the details in just a bit. Well, that was a look, of course, at how the markets are performing. As we said there, that rand picture seemingly quite interesting. The emerging market picture continues to suffer quite a bit as well there. And we'll chat now to Warwick Lucas, of course, from Galileo Capital, as he unpacks just exactly as things have unfolded today. As we said, that all share around 0.25% lower. The industrials picture around 1% as well, down today. The financials, however, managing to pick up 1%. Warwick Lucas from Galileo Capital, thank you so much for the time. Bit of a negative tinge to the market across the board there. The ECB doing the business, I suppose.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, that was a fairly meaningful slash to GDP growth estimates. Look, those are relatively mature economies. We don't expect big growth out of them anytime in the near years ahead, but nevertheless, a cut of 0.6% when you're already only at 1.6 it's a number. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, no surprise at negativity there. Yeah, and of course it then impacts locally as well. That rand as well falling to 14.51, a 9-week low as well for the rand. One would have hoped that, you know, we had positivity a little earlier on, but it's all faded away. Yeah, look, I think talk around central banks, independence, etc. I think a key feature there. I think mentions by the president as to nationalisation of the Reserve Bank. Yeah. There's a risk of some very confused messages there. I mean, it isn't the be-all and end-all that the Reserve Bank has to have private shareholders, but to do so in an environment in which, frankly, a lot of trust has been lost over the years, and there's only just been a little bit of restoration of trust, is a very poor strategic move. And I think it does need some addressing, particularly the issue of, well, how do we keep politicians at a respectable arm's length from monetary policy? It's a critical economic brick.
Yeah, shucks. So, going to be quite interesting to continue to look out for that. Of course, we head all the way through to the MPC decision as well, which happens later this month, if I'm not mistaken, so around the 21st as well. Also, we then have the ratings agency set to come out as well this month. So, it will be quite interesting on that front. But in terms of earnings news, this week has been quite a busy one. We had the likes of MTN as well yesterday, which was quite interesting. We managed to chat to the CFO, Ralph Mupita, as well, saying the message really from them is that it's time for them to get even better. They're done losing market share in this country and they aim to do even better. Do you think that they can finally do away with those Nigerian woes?
I think they certainly have had some moves there, but I think what's particularly important there and why the market was so positive after a trading update that we discussed last week and were somewhat taken aback by, is that management decided to clearly deal with the issues. So we saw there, quite apart from listing a Nigerian business and pushing ahead hard with that, there's a big portfolio trimming down there, and this is very important in a business that quite frankly has seen debt balloon in the last few years. I mean, most of it has gone into paying dividends, which is not a particularly productive use of your balance sheet. So clearly MTN showing an important change of direction there, and it's very important when you've lost a lot of trust vis-a-vis the market, which MTN has, and I think this marks a turning point.
Yeah, it will be quite interesting to see from here on in. I mean, some would say that it certainly is a good company overall, trading around 80 odd rand a share. And if you take a look at how things performed, and I'll take a look at that just after the break as well, just that share price going from around 260 rand right down to 80 bucks. That's a massive, massive fall. But one that has perhaps, taken a even heavier knock, particularly just today, and has done for some time. We've spoken about it before. Aspen Pharmaceuticals. What is going on there?
Yeah. Okay, so I think it was a case that there'd been a lot of denial about it in the past, and I think it was a sudden realization of, wow, things caught up with them.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, looking at the share trading as it has, I mean, some players might have inferred, well, is this thing going to zero or something? Well, I don't think so. I think it got overdone. But certainly Aspen, I mean, more or less this time last year, in fact, a little bit further back in January 18, I mean, we had the Aspen take its first big fall when we had the Viceroy reports out, and it was considered a suspect for Viceroy's attentions.
Sure.
And a lot of discussion came up then, and Aspen basically battered it away, and we now find the situation that debt is quite chunky and it needs to be dealt with. So although we see, for example, I mean, they're still able to service their debts and so on. I mean, the debt now is 60 billion rand. The interest bill last year was only 2 billion rand. And you think, wow, that's a pretty small debt, but or interest coupon. But of course, a lot of that's in dollars. And then, of course, if you have rates go from, say, 2% to 3%, that is a very big number. And we saw that now starting to come through in these interim numbers. So prior interest was 800 million, now it's 1.2 billion, and suddenly Aspen's surplus there is getting chewed into, and they need to address it in a very substantial way, in the same way that MTN now addressed their portfolio problems.
Yeah, if you just take a look at that share price, losing around half of its value at some stage as well today, that clearly tells you then that Stephen Saad is probably going to move out of Durban and come to Joburg and really try to find a way to get these investors back into that share price and back the story of Aspen as well. Very quickly, I wanted to touch as well on GDP, which came out a little bit earlier on this week. 0.8% to the number for 2018, that is. 1.4% for that fourth quarter. That brings us to this year, some hoping for 1%. You see any of that coming through?
Well, it certainly was an anemic number, but it would, at least the arrow pointed the right way.
Yeah.
I think another report that perhaps gives a little bit of a clue that quietly slipped out in the last day as well was electricity production. You see that was down, and I think that's sort of giving you a heads up of where some of the difficulties lie in getting the economy right.
Eskom scenario, of course, playing its part in that first quarter of business. That is Warwick Lucas, of course, from Galileo Capital. Appreciate your time. We'll do this again next Friday, right? Okay, more business news coming up right after the short break. We'll analyze just the things that have happened in the economic week that was. Do stay tuned.